Oh, good. Not so many. So again, thank you everybody who wrote questions in this box. Remember also, starting tomorrow, we have the interviews. And quite frankly, that sometimes on those interviews, that sometimes somebody asks me one question and I answer it, and then they go, the next person comes up and they ask the same question again, and then they leave, and then another of the same question just about. So I do actually prefer it if you can put it in the box. And then it shares it with everybody. And it's still anonymous. All it means is you have to understand your question and write it down in a simplified form. And that means that it's far more efficient. But still, some people like just to have that personal interview. But nevertheless, these questions in the box I always prefer. And it also serves the purpose of giving me feedback of how it's going with you. See if there's any of the talks which I've given, any of the statements which I've made, which haven't been properly understood. So it's also a thank you for giving me feedback. Anyway, the first question. Dear Ajahn, in Chanda, permission, consent is an enlightenment factor. So, dear Ajahn, is Chanda, permission, consent an enlightenment factor? Where does it fit in? It's not one of the 7 enlightenment factors, but nevertheless, when we have any factors of 7 enlightenment factors, or just the abandoning of some of the, sometimes they call them fetters, sometimes lower fetters, sometimes there's many defilements, poisons or whatever. There's so many sort of descriptions of these Pali words, but nevertheless you can actually see where it actually comes from. And they have many, many, many words, especially for one of the most difficult of things to let go of, which is like wanting. It's so much so that for quite a few years now, one of the most common sort of like really bad qualities which stop you getting enlightened is called tanha. And many times people say that's like a craving. But for me, it's please again get your own understanding of what these words actually mean, because they do change the way you meditate. Instead of craving is, to me, a very intense form of wanting. And sometimes it's too intense. It means the smaller forms of wanting are kind of ignored. So these days, whenever I render these words in writing or in talks, instead of just calling it sort of craving, I say all types of wanting. As part of the dependent origination, it's just part of just about all of the unpleasant things of this which cause you so much suffering, even to the point of the second factor of the Eightfold Path. Second factor of the Four Noble Truths, and that's the cause of suffering. It's not just craving; it's even small parts, even lesser intensities of wanting, and you can actually experience that for yourself. If ever you get into some nice meditations, even wanting anything, even a small thing, disturbs the mind. And it stops you letting go and disappearing. So it's not just craving, even any types of wanting. And that is hard for many people to understand, that even small types of wanting, even for good things, even that can disturb the mind and can hinder your progress to being a fully enlightened arahat. Once you are an arahat, if there's any wanting which you have, it's always for good stuff, and even that is sometimes seen as a burden. And to emphasize that point, I don't know, many of you have heard me say this before. Now, after the Buddha became fully enlightened under the Bodhi tree, then one of the important events there was this person called sahampati. And people sometimes usually say Brahma sahampati. What does that word actually mean, Brahma sahampati? He was not like a god. He was a non-returner in a previous life. So still like a heavenly being, but nevertheless was always termed, when I was young studying Buddhism, always termed to be a god. Now God Sahampati just came and asked the Buddha, please teach, there are beings with little dust in their eyes. And I often mention that if ever you go to India, please maybe you shouldn't teach, because it's a very dusty country at many times of the year. That's only a joke, don't get offended. But you can see that was a metaphor. And he asked the Buddha to teach. There's some beings who will be able to understand the Dhamma you teach, and we carry on this tradition. But it took a while before I found out who this Sahampati was. Sahampati was a monk under Kassapa the Buddha, the previous Buddha, and so was this person sitting under the Bodhi tree, now called our Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. In a previous life of Siddhartha Gautama, this was stated quite clearly in the Gatikara Sutta. He was an ordained bhikkhu monk under Kassapa the Buddha. And that's where they became friends, Sahampati, but also this monk called Gatikara. It's a lovely sutta for people to read, because it changes a lot of the way they understand, just where Buddhas come from, and why some of them become enlightened. They call Pacceka Buddhas, and they don't teach. A lot of times it's because no one asks them to teach. Imagine you're so still, so peaceful. That degree of stillness, I kind of mentioned it this morning. Sometimes you're sitting there having a beautiful, peaceful time, you don't even want to get up to have some lunch. Your will, motivation is almost like totally wiped out. And you need somebody else to put that seed in your mind to be able to teach. And that's actually what Sahampati did to his old friend, now the Buddha Gautama. And that's one of the reasons why that even that chanda, everything gets kind of calmed and wiped out, and it's hard to get it started again. And that's what Sahampati did. Go down and say, well done, congratulations, now teach. And as a result of that, the Buddha started teaching. And that's one of the reasons why in the old days, when we used to call Sahampati Brahma Sahampati, like God Sahampati, I remember one of the monks, he was a German monk, but very smart, and he actually said, oh yeah, that's true, so we can actually literally say, thank God for Buddhism. Thank Brahma Sahampati, that God. He wasn't really a god, but that was just, I don't know where that term came from. But then nevertheless, he was a non-returner. What about the Buddha himself? Siddhartha Gautama, when he was born as Siddhartha Gautama, what status was he? Was he just, you can read it in the suttas, he was a monk under Kassapa the Buddha before. And he got many of his friends from that time, went to visit him, and actually, we were fellow villagers together, like Gatikara said to him, like, well done. We've known each other before. It's like friends. You go and congratulate one another after so many years. And that was with Gatikara and Siddhartha Gautama, congratulating the Buddha. So it wasn't that long ago when the previous life of the Buddha under Kassapa the Buddha. What status would you think Siddhartha Gautama was when he was born? Yeah, that's what I say, yeah. You know why I say that? Because in another sutta it's actually quoted that once returners, for the most part, are born in a Tusita realm. It's not said specifically, but it's all the evidence is kind of there. You know, you were someone of that degree of power, you're going to become a Buddha in this life, and you were with Kassapa the Buddha before. Surely he must have got some kind of attainments or insights in his previous life. And it also explains why he was only a 7-year-old kid sitting under a rose apple tree and watching his father do a ceremony. And he spontaneously got into one of these first jhanas. Have you got into a first jhana yet? He was only a 7-year-old kid. Where did that ability come from? He had no teacher as a 7-year-old kid yet. It must have actually come, I reckon, from the previous life under such a great teacher like Kassapa the Buddha. And also at his birth, they say that he walked 7 steps and he talked. And of course, being a skeptic, and I'm always very skeptical, that you wonder, oh, that was just some myth which persisted. But then, of course, over those years, you've listened to a lot of people, and some of those people have said, they're not gaining anything from this, said to me that their kid did talk when they were born, which is kind of illogical. It's not supposed to happen. A kid talks. In that particular case, you've all heard it before, but I'm going to say it because it fits in here. When these Westerners here in Perth, they weren't Buddhists, but their second kid had been born, and it brought the kid home from the maternity ward or the hospital, wherever. And that one evening, the mum said to her elder son, who's only 2 or 3 years of age, say good night to your baby brother Paul or something. And so he went over to where Paul was just in a sort of I always call it like a crib or a cot or something. I don't know the term these days. But he said to his baby brother, just 3 or 4 days old, good night, Paul. And Paul said to his elder brother, good night, Peter. He was only 3 or 4 days old. And you think that's impossible. And the parents thought that was impossible too. And they just stopped whatever they were doing and just watched as their elder son, Peter, said to his baby brother Paul, good night, Paul, said it again. And this time they were paying full attention. They were mindful, even though they didn't know what that word meant, because anything which is so stunning, you do pay full attention. And then the baby brother said again, good night, Peter. And these weren't Buddhists. They were just ordinary, actually didn't go to any church or anything. And they came to tell the Buddhist monks because they thought, at least we can find somebody who won't ridicule us. And I say, yes, that's probably true. Your baby, only 4 or 5 days old, did speak. And one of the things which convinced me, I always remember them saying that their baby, only a few days old, said, good night, Peter, to the elder brother, in an adult voice. It wasn't so in baby speak. The toning was like an elder person speaking. And how does that work? Now, being meditating for so many years, you realize the brain has not formed enough yet, developed enough yet, to be able to speak like that and have that language, but it's from the previous lives. The mind has developed and it's still there. In the same way we have terminal lucidity when a person's brain is dead, basically, and they can speak. I don't know if any of you ever remember this article. It was one of these Time articles many years ago, and I wish I could find it or keep it, but it was one of the first records of terminal lucidity. That's when a person is dying, basically their brain is gone, and they can still speak. And there was a person who had a brain cancer. It was in the United States, and because the brain cancer was developing and was basically taking over the brain inside this patient's head, it got so close to the time of death, the neurologist could actually predict it to within like an hour or so, that your father, your patriarch, is going to die about this time in the afternoon. So they were all the family members were around the bedside, and the doctor was there as well. And then, without any warning, the patient opened his eyes, recognized all the family members, and started talking to them. And saying, how are you? Where have you been? What's been happening? For about 40 or 50 minutes, and then shut his eyes and died. And at that point, the neurologist, I remember reading the article, if I remember it correctly, the neurologist commented, this should not happen at all. At that point, the brain was almost totally sort of taken over by the cancer. And I recognize that as, the brain gets taken over, but the mind is still going well. And the mind can actually make those words up. And that's basically how it works. Sometimes people will think, Ajahn Brahm is just loves believing or telling these silly stories. But I do also remember telling stories like that at Nolamara. And there's other people who come up and just confirm these stories, like this doctor, it's only a couple of years ago, who comes, he's a GP, comes to listen to the talks we give at our city centre in Perth. And he came up and said, I just had an experience like that just a few days ago. One of his patients, a woman, got that one wrong. One of his patients, a man, was getting close to death, and his last instructions was, in the drawer next to his bed was a book with all his family members. It had telephone numbers. I remember it was telephone numbers written in the book. Please call them if I'm about to die, one after the other, so that they can come and be with me at the very end. And at this particular time, the doctor said something like he hadn't been able to talk for quite a long time. He was that sick, he was dying. And then when those death signs came, the doctor ran to the bedside and followed the instructions, picked out the book and started ringing some of his close family members. And he said, it comes to Nolamara, he said, right in front of me, he said, when I got to his daughter, Julie, I still remember that name, Julie. I rang her, and Julie answered, and the doctor said, you better come to hospital quick, your father's about to die. And that's when the father opened his eyes and then said to the doctor, please tell Julie how much I love her. And then he died. It was only a minute or two of terminal lucidity, but he said that should not have happened. But it did, and he saw it, he heard it. That's what happens with terminal lucidity. In this case, it's not beginning lucidity when you're born. If any of you have any weird experiences like that, and you're not lying, you've got nothing out of this, please let people know, because it changes a lot of how people relate to life. In this particular case, at first I thought, now I can speak when they're just a baby. But maybe the Siddhartha Gautama did. And what he said, he put his finger up, this is my last life, and I'm the chief in the world. Why did he say that, if he said anything? That's what a once returner would say. So it's not 100% clear evidence, but it's very, very suggestive. And also, a special being like that is born with a once returner doesn't have to keep every precept. They can break precepts. But nevertheless, they're generally a good, wise person. And in this life, the power of their previous life experience would make them incline to a life of renunciation, wherever they can manifest that. And so that's what Siddhartha Gautama did. So, I'm not really answering that many questions here, but I love these sort of things which make you understand Buddhism much more deeply. So, now controversial. Shouldn't be controversial. If you've heard me answer this before, then please be quiet. Can the next Buddha be female? Nuns? What do you reckon? Who says yes, they can? I do. Why? What determines just the gender of the next Buddha? What would determine that gender mostly would be where you think you'd make the greatest effect. Where would you be born? If a Buddha was born, maybe 10 years ago, I think they'd probably be born in New York somewhere, probably in Manhattan. Why? Because once they become enlightened, they know how to present these teachings in a very good way to the most people. If you were the Buddha, you're going to be reborn in your next life as an enlightened being, where would you take birth? And what gender? Interesting question for you. But certainly the gender is not specific as long as people take you seriously. And they would listen. Anyway, that's Ajahn Brahm. Now, what was the question I was supposed to answer? Oh, yeah. Where does it fit in? Consent is one of the desires. And it is an important part of meditation especially. I just stick to meditation. Simply because if you don't have consent, this allowance to be, this letting it be, for the mind to become really still, you'll stop it becoming still. You're afraid. Or you're conditioned to believe that you have to do something before you get something. Look, how many years you've been doing stuff, trying to make things happen. In the world, yes. If I want to live in a monastery, I have to build it first. If you want a retreat centre, find a monk like me who can build this thing for you. But, please excuse me for wandering off, but this, I always love telling you this story, this floor you're sitting on this side of the meditation hall, that it was actually on a Good Friday, on that holiday, that we actually, how many years ago now? 2009?
2009.
Yeah, okay. That we actually had the first opening ceremony for Jhana Grove Retreat Centre. And I was basically the one in charge of building everything here. And I asked the builder beforehand, when can we have our opening ceremony? Will it be ready, by Easter 2019? Oh, no trouble at all. Yeah, we've got plenty of time. We'll probably have it ready by February, I think they said. I had enough experience with builders to say February means like April or May or something. So anyway, they said definitely by April. And of course, what happened? Most of it was finished, but inside this hall, there was no floor. On that side, it was finished, but on this side, the people doing the floor, they left. It was Easter. So they went on their holidays. And we had no floor. And then the following day, we had all these dignitaries coming, including, who's the patron of this retreat centre? Still is? Jeff Gallup, yeah. He was the premier. He actually just, before he resigned, he just came over here to get some help with his depression. And he was always really grateful because of that. But anyhow, the floor was not finished. You had all these important people coming the next day. And please, if this happens in Dharmasara for you, just do it. Stay up all night and finish the project. It's really worthwhile. And so the monks came up, and I think they went to, was it 4 o'clock in the morning? 4 o'clock in the morning, finishing off the floor. It's a beautiful job they did. They had about 1 or 2 hours of rest, and then afterwards they got up to do the big ceremony. And after the ceremony, the start of the first retreat, 9-day retreat, or 8-day retreat here in Jhana Grove. And to me, I never think that's exploiting. I think what an amazing thing it is that we can say, yeah, it needs to be done, there's no other way, let's go and do it. And that inspires me. So anyway, the one in charge of this, Ajahn Brahm was involved, but mostly Ajahn Santuti at Kusala Monastery. And it was just amazing what he could do. Anyway, where did I get into that? Oh, we got Chanda. And then they're wanting to do something. After a while, people actually tell me this. Ajahn Brahm, you're a senior monk now, you should stop doing things. And I consent to that. I can't want it. I have to kind of let it happen. And when you let it happen, then of course you give it the opportunity to work. Okay, I can't sort of not tell just what's straight in my mind right now. It was just this afternoon. Had like a free afternoon. So you know what I did? Had a rest after lunch, but then afterwards started meditating. No one was watching. I had all this time by myself in my hut. It's beautiful. You really get, I don't know if you can notice a change in the way I speak or the way my energy levels, the happiness and the clarity. That's a beautiful meditation this afternoon in my little room. That's why I encourage you, if you really get hot in meditation, don't mean temperature-wise, I mean you're really sort of getting into it, just carry on sitting there. Your hut is great because no one disturbs you there. And you can really kind of bliss out and have a wonderful afternoon. I had a marvellous time there. But I could only do that if I gave myself permission to do that. The chanda. No desire. If it happens, it happens. When it does start happening, you just let it happen. That's what the chanda means. There's always that letting it happen. Let go. Let be. That's what the chanda is. Let it be. Okay. At what stage of calming is chanda, consent, permission used, and how is it used? I think I answered that just now. You're just sitting there, it's really going well. Don't interfere. That's one of the reasons also, if you ever look at some of these suttas, there's one beautiful sutta in the Anguttara Tens, and I remember Bhikkhu Bodhi's title he gave to it, Enlightenment is a Natural Process. I think you've heard that before, I hope. And what it means is that you don't actually do anything. You can't stop it. Actually, you can stop it, by messing around. But you start to see things happening, getting really peaceful. And little things, like when you start to have some happiness in your mind, just the mind likes to stay there. It doesn't need to hold on to anything. It's got confidence. You're having a great time. Look, all the Sri Lankans here. If you have a husband who's watching a cricket match, do you ask him, do you need effort to watch that cricket match? Are you really struggling to keep your attention there and so you don't wander off? He can't do anything else. It's a natural. The joy or the interest he has in what he's observing kind of grabs his attention and pulls him into the cricket match. And many of his other senses disappear. Just like in deep meditation, the other senses disappear. Please don't criticize him if you ask him, dinner's ready, darling, and he doesn't respond. He can't hear you. Some of those senses have stopped. I think you get to know what I mean. And that's kind of what happens, in some of these meditations. All the other things, even your tummy's saying, I'm hungry, I need to do something, I need to go to the toilet. You can't perceive that. And that's actually how it becomes a natural, beautiful, happy way of being really peaceful and staying in meditation for long enough so it happens. That's where chanda comes in. Okay, thank you for that question. I'm sorry that... Oh no, it's only 20 minutes that answer, that's not long. Actually, it was 30 minutes. Anyway, I've got a few questions left, so better... Is it possible to get someone out of a jhana, first, second, third, fourth? Are there any harmful effects if it can be done? Actually, how you get a person out of a jhana... Okay, let's make it sort of real. There was, at the beginning of the Rains retreat last year, I don't know if any of you remember this, we actually give some opportunity for some Hong Kong disciples to come here and do a sort of a quick retreat at the beginning of the Rains, together with some Indonesians as well. We give them an opportunity. And at the end of their retreat, and it's actually the opening of the Rains, and the beginning of the Rains retreat ceremony. The beginning of the Rains retreat ceremony. One of them, when we had the ceremony over in Bodhinyana Monastery, they hadn't turned up. This one lady. She was been sitting on the stupa most of the night. And when they asked her, come over, we've got to go for breakfast now and go to the ceremony, she didn't move. Unfortunately, I told them that you can tell if a person's dead or they're just meditating. Just feel the body. If it's still warm, they're still meditating. She was still warm. So they knew she hadn't died. They didn't call ambulance. They just came and asked me, look, we've got to go to airport and get on the aircraft. What's going to happen if she's still sitting there and she doesn't respond? How are we going to get her through the customs? And so the answer is, you go and talk to her, but you don't shout. Imagine what it's like. You're in such a subtle state of mind and you shout at a person. They can't stand that. It's too harsh. how you get a person out of a deep meditation, if it's not that deep, maybe first jhana, you talk to them with as much kindness and gentleness as you possibly can. And I told him to do that. Go up to her and tell her that Ajahn Brahm asks you to please come to Bodhinyana Monastery. With as much kindness as you possibly can manufacture. And that's what they did. And it was about half an hour later, she came walking into the Dhamma hall at Bodhinyana Monastery. And it's about 15 minutes walk from here to the monastery. And I just asked her, are you hungry? Because she missed her breakfast. I said, no, I'm fine. And she just leant against the wall, closed her eyes and carried on meditating a bit more. But this time over in Bodhinyana Monastery hall. That's how you get a person out of a jhana. You talk to them, but never with firmness, never shout. Do it really, really kindly and calmly, and give them a good reason for that. That makes sense? But sometimes you get in such deep meditation that even kind words can't get you out. Nothing can get you out for a while. It just has to run its course. Can I tell these stories? Really, these are the stories which I like to tell. When people say about how do you deal with a husband who always just disturbs you, or what should I do with my kids who are misbehaving, that's kind of not inspiring. Anyway, this is of there's plenty of these lovely stories. One of these monks, he was a Vietnamese monk, Theravada Vietnamese monk. You don't know him in Sydney. You've heard this story many times, but it always inspires me. At the start of the retreat, they're supposed to do a little meditation for half an hour and then the first talk, like a 9-day retreat like we do here. And this monk, he sat down for the half an hour meditation, but he never came out for 8 days. It was 8 days. I always saw in the sutras that 7 days was the max. But when it says 7 days, it means roughly 7 days. So he was meditating for 8 days. Never had anything to drink, never went to toilet, never had anything to eat. It didn't move at all, just sat there for 8 days. And of course, they didn't do anything, they respected him so much. And so about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock the first night, they went to bed. They got up in the morning, he hadn't moved. And so they did their meditation, or I think they did some chanting too. But he was just sitting there all the time, just like a Buddha statue. And after 8 days of that, then we came out of meditation, and the first thing he did was to apologize. He said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The meditation was so deep, I just lost all idea of what time is. Perfectly aware, blissing out, but time had no meaning. And he apologized because what you're really supposed to do, if any of you ever get nice meditations like that, what to do before you enter, you set the time. Tell yourself, look, I've got to come out, please, you have to come out here before Saturday. When is the time we have to leave and pack up? Saturday lunchtime, okay. So please tell yourself that if you're really getting into the meditation. So you get in your car and go home instead of causing a lot of trouble, for a poor retreat manager. And it works. If you want to try that, this was my first meditation teacher taught me this, and it was amazing. It worked so well. If you're going to sleep tonight, I don't know what time you want to go to bed, tell yourself, say you want to get up by 5 o'clock in the morning. What does it actually say in the retreat schedule? 4:30?
With gusto.
With gusto. Forget about gusto. So you tell yourself you really plan to get up by 4:30 tomorrow morning. Tell yourself, I will wake up at 4:25. I will wake up at 4:25. I usually do this to myself 3 times. And I do it slowly, clearly, in your preferred language, and you pay full attention, as much mindfulness as you can to everything you're saying. And you set your alarm clock for 4:30, but say you're going to get up at 4:25. And when you set your alarm clock to 4:30, that gives you a sense that you don't have to worry about anything. If it doesn't work, the alarm will wake you up. And then when I did this, every time I would wake up at 4:25, or whatever time I set, within 1 or 2 minutes either side of 4:25. It was kind of fascinating. Your mind, even when it's asleep, had its own little timer. And so you realize that's what you do in meditation as well. You say that, I want to meditate for like 2 hours or something. And you sit down, okay, I have to get out at 2 o'clock. I should do this when I answer questions. I have to finish the question by 5 minutes. But you say to yourself, I've got to wake up at 2 hours in, whatever time it is, 4:30 tomorrow, 4:15 or whatever time it is. And you find you wake up, and then you haven't got a clue what time it is, so you look at the clock somewhere, and you'd be amazed. It's 1 or 2 minutes either side of the time. So it's a wonderful way of understanding how meditation works as well. It's at the time. But when actually they're in it, if they're in a deep meditation, past the first jhana or a deep first jhana, then it's impossible to get them out. Are there any harmful effects if it can be done? The harmful effects it basically can't be done unless they're in a sort of a shallow first jhana. The harmful effects are you get these beautiful opportunities. So if someone is in any of these jhanas, protect them, let them stay. Honestly, if any of you get into a deep jhana and it's the end of the retreat and you have to clean up at the end of the retreat, just leave them there. We'll just protect them. Because they're amazing states of mind. It's actually what you're here for. And so if you have one of those states of mind, just care for them, look after them. You have all their details, the next of kin or something. You just tell them, look, they're not going to get back to Adelaide or UK, wherever you're trying to get to afterwards. They're going to be a week late. It's worth it. You're asking some really nice questions. Could you please do a guided meditation after the evening chanting and guide us into deep meditation? Much better. You can do a guided meditation, but the guided meditation is really helpful at the beginnings of meditation. You can't guide a person into the deep meditations. You just get them started and point them in the correct direction, and then they have to go themselves. Even the Buddha used to say, the Buddhas just show the way. You have to actually do the process. Because it gets to a point in meditation, that's the last thing which you need is actually sound from outside. Sometimes you just can't hear it, any sound. And that's even through walking meditation. I wanted to talk about walking meditation a little bit, and this question actually brings up this nice little story about walking meditation. We have all these beautiful mats over there. We give it red carpet treatment in here. The yoga mats are not carpet, but at least hopefully it attracts you to do walking meditation. And when you do walking meditation, you start at one end, you walk to the other end, you come back again, you don't get anywhere. Yeah. Do you understand? That's why we just walk backwards and forwards. We don't actually get anywhere. You stop. Not physically, but mentally, emotionally. And when you do the walking meditation, what works for me is I pay attention to the feelings in my feet. How does it feel on a yoga mat? How does it feel on this bamboo floor? How does it feel on the concrete? It gets you aware of your body. And that body stops a lot of the thinking, the body awareness. And then you soon get to be aware of how walking occurs. And you can actually feel the muscles in your legs as you start walking, as you continue walking. When you start walking, when say your right leg lifts up, this is how I develop my walking meditation. I say, how does it lift up? What muscles have to move and to keep your balance? And does your foot, that's my point of reference, does it actually go up vertically? And of course it can't. My foot just goes up and backwards slightly. And then when it goes forward, how does that movement occur? And for me, it was never straight. It was always like an arc. And how does it go down? What's the first part of your foot which touches the ground? Isn't that the ball of my right foot just underneath the big toe? That's how I walk. And you get to feel all of these things. And it gets fascinating. And I remember this time, I was still a young monk, actually just ordained. And many of the other people who were not in a forest monastery, in a monastery in Bangkok, they had other things to do. But after the morning chanting, which I had to go to, the main hall was empty. So I did my walking meditation in there for an hour every morning. And I knew it was an hour because it's really weird. We don't have this here. They had a grandfather clock in the main hall. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. It would chime every quarter of an hour. So I realized it took me exactly half an hour, usually every time, to go from one end of the hall to the other end of the hall and then walk back again. It wasn't actually as long as this hall, maybe a couple of meters shorter. But it was always like 1 hour walking meditation, not making much distance, because you got so interested in the movements of your feet, and it was fascinating. And I realized how deep I got in meditation, and it answers the question about how does sound affect you when you're doing sitting meditation even. This is just walking meditation. And then I was like 3/4 or halfway through my 1 hour's walking meditation, and then that's when I heard this sound. It was really weird. It was like, a few miles away. You could just perceive it. And it was actually, I paid attention to it, and it was actually saying my name. Brahmawangso. The full name. Brahmawangso. And of course, when you hear something weird like that, you're thinking, what the heck is that? That's really strange. So I paid more attention to it. And as I paid more attention to it, after a couple of minutes, I realized it was another monk who was shouting in my ear hole that far away. But I remember how I experienced it. It was like it was someone a long distance away, like on the other, on the cottage, the monk's cottage where I stay, and someone shouting here, Brahmawangso, but he was actually right next to my ear hole. And then I realized he was shouting at me to get my attention because I was supposed to go to like a house blessing. And I'd forgotten all about that. And that's the only way he can get my attention. It wasn't a jhana, but I didn't realize just how close and how much of the world I just left behind to get that deep in meditation. All I could notice these beautiful subtle feelings in my feet walking, and sound had almost been totally deleted. So see if you can do that. Do the walking meditation, and the bell chimes, or someone says, lunchtime, and you can't hardly hear them. It's interesting when you do stuff like that, because when you go home, people are going to ask you, how was the retreat? If you haven't got any interesting stories to tell, you feel like you wasted your time. Okay, next one. Dear Ajahn, Could a sickness manifest from remembering a past life injury, sickness, or something someone had done to hurt us, rather than unwholesome action I've done in the past? Actually, I would say yes. How we can create sicknesses in ourselves. I told many of this story when I was in the Psychic Research Society over at Cambridge. We used to do some amazing experiments. And one of those experiments, this was not a bunch of hippies doing these experiments. One of my friends, that was that Bernard Carr. He was in this group as well. And he became emeritus, he's now emeritus professor of theoretical physics. He actually was one of Stephen Hawking's co-workers. And Professor Stephen Hawking's. And one of the things we did was the stick with a 4-inch nail experiment. And just an ordinary stick, 4-inch nail on the end. And we convinced one of these students, we hypnotized the student first of all, and we convinced him, this nail has been heated up, it's red hot. It wasn't red hot, it was just ordinary room temperature. And then we touched him with the nail on the skin. Ah! He screamed in pain. I could kind of understand that. If you believe it's going to hurt, it does hurt. What was really shocked me, and that's why I tell the story so many times, a blister came up on his skin when this room temperature nail touched him. A wound had been created for no physical reason at all, just his mind believed in this so much. And it just showed me, one of these times, the power of the mind, which is much more than you'd ever think. That's one of the reasons why. That the mind, if it kind of remembers something like a past life injury or sickness, or somebody did something to you, it can create those wounds if you let it. You don't have to. As your mindfulness increases, you can say no. I'll tell you one of these other stories, which was kind of weird. But I remember the first time I became a monk and moved over to Thailand and was a monk at Wat Ba Nana Chat. It's actually, at that time, it was called Wat Ba America Wat. Because all the monks there were American, except for me, I was the only English one there. That's his first name. It's changed to Wat Ba America Wat when a few other monks came from different countries. But anyway, I remember that often in the morning, we'd be sitting there waiting for the morning meal, and one of the monks would say, "Oh, I had a terrible night last night, I had diarrhea." Another monk said, "Yeah, me too. I was on the toilet all night, most of the night." And another one said, "Yeah, I had diarrhea as well." I'm not just saying this. Sometimes it's kind of embarrassing. And I would say, "I didn't. I was actually really weirdly healthy." And one of the reasons for that, I kind of made a vow. And the vow was, I am not going to get sick for 1 year. Strange thing to say. I don't know why I believed that, but it actually worked. So if you want to avoid some sickness, you can try that. And I say that simply because I know it works. Just the power of your mind. If you've got some nice meditation, I'm not going to get sick. Give it a try. How many of the sicknesses do we create? I'll leave that with you. As this is due to wrong views, the stream winner exempt from such past-driven sicknesses. They can be. They can be. It's their choice. Are you enlightened? If yes, How do you know? If no, why not? I'll tell you later. You know, one of the traditions, if somebody says they are, then that's a sure sign they're not. You know, how do you actually tell a person you're enlightened? In the time of the... You're all interested now, aren't you? Well, maybe I'll tell you later. Now, this was that great story of Ananda with the Buddha. And first this monk came up to the Buddha and said, someone who's fully enlightened never thinks they're better than anybody else, never thinks they're worse than anybody else, never thinks they're the same as anybody else. But said, yeah, correct. And then a few minutes later, another monk came up and said the same thing. Someone who's enlightened never thinks they're better, the worse, or the same. Correct. And then the Buddha turned around to Ananda and said, that was two new arahats. That's how arahats sort of tell me they have had that attainment. The whole idea of self and judging themselves vanishes. I have the condition called tinnitus. Do you have any sharing of people who have same condition? How do they handle this condition? As I'm getting more present to now, the clinging is... the kinging or the singing or the ringing. The ringing is louder. How deep meditation helps. Again, there used to be this gentleman here. Remember Peter? A very old gentleman who used to keep coming to this as many retreats as he could here in Jhana Grove. And when I told him, he has very bad tinnitus, but he said when he came here, it vanished. At least got less. And that's why he kept coming here, and that's why I tried to make sure he could come here as often as he could. Eventually he passed away. But nevertheless, the deep meditation, relaxation, seems to be able to help. And in the end, what I would suggest, I don't have tinnitus, but if I did, I would actually go to the center of it. Not try and escape from it, but go inside of it. And when you really go to the center of things, it's like you're focusing in, zooming in, and all those other things tend to kind of disappear. And if you do get a deep meditation, sometimes it's amazing just when you come out afterwards how you feel. Sometimes it's gone for a while. Sometimes, I don't know, maybe even forever. That was always the story Ajahn Brahm told me of how he got past his malaria fever. Because malaria in those days, all the forest monks would get malaria simply because you were living in the virus soup of the jungle, and there was no medication the monks would take. And so once he said he had a terrible attack of malaria. When you get sort of low energy or any other type of sickness which weakens you, then the malaria virus or fever builds up and you have an attack of malaria. And he said on this one occasion he decided, okay, I'm just going to sit with it. So he just sat and he always said he goes inside everything. And he said his perception was that he was in like a forest which was like burning. He could kind of feel the heat of the malaria fever, but it was right in the middle of it. So it was easy to actually feel like it wasn't burning him. And then it got so hot, he said, it exploded. And once it exploded, that was the last time he had malaria fever. Sometimes the mind does weird and strange things. And that's when anything this happens, don't ever go and disturb it. If you want to explode, that's a wonderful thing, to explode in deep meditation. And just fevers and stuff kind of vanish. That happens. Hi Ajahn, hi. So sorry for the nature of this question. Are you really sorry? Should I continue reading it? Okay. Oh my goodness. They actually spelt this wrong. Masturbation. Masturbation. Regarding lay practitioners, lay people can be sexually active, whether single or married, and masturbation can be a part of that activity. Is there anywhere in the Pali Canon where the Buddha speaks of masturbation regarding lay practitioners? Can masturbation be a hindrance to the layperson's practice? Of course it can be, because it just gets the senses active. But I don't know, is there anywhere in the sutras? In the Vinaya, yes, for monks. But sometimes, why do you want to do that? It makes sort of that part of your body to be, it gives it kind of importance. Whatever you keep focusing on and focusing on and focusing on tends to bother you more and more and more. If you can restrain that part of your life, then it's not so important. You don't even think about it. So you're free of one of the hindrances. But I'm the wrong monk to ask about that. I've been a monk for 50 years, for goodness sake. So would any younger monks like to answer that question? No, I better not. I don't want to embarrass you. So basically, that's not really part of my wisdom. It's easier for me to let go of the unpleasant thoughts and memories, but my mind indulges in pleasant, good. But pleasant sixth sense, not pleasant five sense, not the pleasures of masturbation or the pleasures of movies. See if you can watch the pleasure of the mind. Even little pleasures like sunsets. I don't know if you've done this yet. What's actually the weather like in the evening? Can you sit on the stupa and watch the sun go down? Because there's two stupas over there, and now I've said this, you'll all do it, and you have to wait for a spot. But some of those pleasures of beautiful sights in the distance, that's one thing I was kind of fascinated by. The enlightened monks and nuns in the time of the Buddha will write these poems about the beauty of living in nature. And they talk about things like mountains and streams and things like sunsets. It's almost as if they don't leave like a clinging behind them once you've seen a sunset or seen like a stream of water. Sometimes you can only enjoy them for a few moments and then you have to let them go. It's maybe because of that they were kind of, they wrote poems about them in the Theravada and Therigatha. But one of the problems is, you will find, if you don't find any pleasure at all, then you tend to the mind actually needs that pleasure, needs some pleasure. If you don't, then like monks who don't get deep meditation, and this is what I've found, they don't get deep meditation, satisfaction in meditation, then they either disrobe or they just go messing around in all sorts of areas where monks really shouldn't go. And I thought, why is that? Because your mind does need some satisfaction, not just if you're a monk or a nun or any person. And that's one of the reasons why you learn how to get your satisfaction as a monk from the meditations. Also from some of the Dharma, the inspirational part of Buddhism. Every now and again, I love this when it happens. One of the monks recently told me of one of the insights he got, totally unexpected, after a nice peaceful meditation. And that kind of made my day. I got inspired by other people's stories of nice deep meditation. That's why if you ever have a nice deep meditation, please come and inspire me. It makes me happy. If you say that you got desperate and you're having a problem with your job or stuff, yeah, I'm supposed to say that, but it doesn't really inspire me. If you say you had trouble with your job, you found this beautiful way of solving the problem, and it's just exactly what the Buddha said, then great. That makes sense to you? I'm just being kind of honest. But if you don't have any joy at all, no happiness at all, what are you going to do? You need that happiness, and sometimes people get depressed, even suicidal. Okay, one of my stories. Once upon a time, there was this spider. Now you know the story, as you heard it before. It's a brilliant story. Once there was a spider, just newly born. And what do spiders do? They have to get a home, and they have to get some food to eat. So this spider found this lovely house, and it just crawled into the corner of the house, made this really nice web. This spider was just so skilled, and was a bit of a perfectionist, so made one of the most beautiful webs you can ever see. It was a kind of web, which I say when I tell this story, that if there was a magazine, just like they have for these beautiful houses people think up and build, it would be in the Web magazine of the year photographs of spider webs. It was absolutely gorgeous. He spent so much effort and time building the web that afterwards he sat in the web in the middle, really exhausted but waiting for lunch. That's how spiders eat, when a fly comes into the web. And that's his lunch. So don't ask a spider to be a vegetarian, please, otherwise they wouldn't live. So anyway, this spider went into the web and waited for lunch. But before any fly or mosquito or anything came even close, the owner of the house saw it, and they took a big broom and they smashed the web to bits. How would you feel if you just spent all that money and time building a home, and before you've even rested in the house, even for one night, someone comes along and smashes your house to bits? And no insurance policy would insure you for damage to a spider web. So that poor old spider had to run for his life. And what do? He needs to go somewhere to stay, so built a spider web in the next house. This time, not as beautiful. And then waited in there for lunch. And then it was a bigger house. A maid saw that spider web and got another stick and smashed it to bits. And then the same happened in the third house, and the fourth house, and the fifth house. And this was must have been a Chinese spider, so tried eight webs. 8's a lucky number. And after 8 webs, still it got smashed to bits. And that was enough. So the poor spider couldn't build any more webs. It had what we call these days PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Even the thought of a corner of a house would make it shake uncontrollably. And because it had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, it was just too scared of going in the house. 8 times it came that close to losing its life. But also, it was really hungry, hadn't had anything to eat, and was all exhausted. And then started to get depressed. Got depressed because started thinking, why don't human beings like spiders? All we do is stay in the corner of their... We don't actually just disturb them, we're just up there in the corner somewhere. And we catch all these animals, like all these other bugs, so the people don't have to deal with them. We don't only catch them, but we kind of dispose them, recycle, we eat them, so they don't have to worry about catching them. We actually do a service for people in the world. Don't you ever respect spiders and what a great service they do to us? Catching all the bugs. You know, when I was in Thailand, I was never afraid of spiders. Because then, I remember one place I stayed, really hot, and there were spiders up in the roof. They were tarantulas. And because it was hot, I had my robe off, I was secluded in there. I had my lower robe on, of course, but my upper robe I took off to cool down. And the tarantulas would fall on me. I loved them. Because, as a monk, you don't have many pleasures. And the tarantulas had such tickly feet. You should try it sometimes. And they would crawl over my chest. Oh, thank you, that was nice. They never bit me. I was kind to tarantulas, and the tarantulas were kind to me. So I respect them. So, has that ever happened to you? I'm not making that up, that actually happened. Okay, you may think that this monk, who's this monk teaching us? But nevertheless, that's true. So anyway, this suicidal spider became depressed, and of course, once you're depressed, you become suicidal. And once the spider became suicidal, he tried to deliberately crawl under people's shoes. But every time he crawled under somebody's shoes, they always found that space between the heel and the sole of the foot, never actually underneath one of those hard parts. And so this is not working. So I tried to crawl across the road under cars, tyres, but always made between the tyres, never actually underneath them. So this suicidal spider realized that when you really are depressed, you can't do anything right, not even kill yourself. And he just gave up. And so I was wandering down the road, really depressed, not knowing what to do. And as I say in this story, if you ever had that feeling that somebody's watching you, and that's what this suicidal spider thought, that someone's watching me. He turned around, it was true. On the side of the road, there was this fattest, happiest spider you've ever seen. And I'll just pause there for a moment. Have you ever noticed that even monks who are really happy So I saw this big happy spider, smiling, just sunning himself in the morning sunshine. And the big fat happy spider saw the suicidal spider and said, "What's up with you? You look so sad, what's wrong?" And the suicidal spider told the big fat happy spider, "Oh, life is so terrible and so hard. All I do is just to try and find a corner of somebody's house and make a web. 8 times I built these webs and they've all been destroyed within a few minutes and I've never had anything to eat. No one loves spiders. No one is kind to spiders. Haven't you got any compassion to spiders? Can we please have more spiders in the kitchen?" I'm glad you're not the health controller. But anyhow, this depressed spider took one look at the big fat happy spider and said, "Hey, how come you're so fat and so happy? Did anybody destroy your web?" He said, "No," said the big fat happy spider. "Well, I've only ever built one web in my whole life. It's still there. I catch plenty of food." And out of compassion, the big fat happy spider said, "Look, I got so much food where I live, and a beautiful web. Why didn't you come in here and you can stay with me?" And then the depressed spider, suicidal spider, said, "Just one moment. Where on earth can you build a web when no one destroys it?" And I've got to stop laughing first. And he said, "Oh, that's easy answer. I built my web in the donation box of Jhana Grove Meditation Retreat Centre. No one ever disturbs you in there. Okay. Check it out. What am I doing? Okay. Well, that's a long time ago I started that question. So when you see the present moment, please look for the joy in it. Look for you can find joy in anything, even when you do something stupid. That's one of the things which I learned from Ajahn Brahm. When I made stupid mistakes, he would actually laugh. He never criticized me, he'd just laugh his head off. And he'd tell all the Thai people as well. I caused so much happiness with Ajahn Brahm. I think that's one of the reasons why he had so many Western monks with him. Because he enjoyed them. They all went to the top universities, but they were so stupid when it came to real life. So, you can actually see happiness in almost anything. Good example is like funerals. When I die, can I let you know my last requests? First of all, when I die, I want to have my funeral before I die. This layman did that. He said, why do you have to just die before you have a funeral? And so he was really, really sick. He got permission to have his funeral while he was still alive, so he could actually see who actually turned up. And he had time to amend his will before. Let's see what people say about me. Usually people say these beautiful things about you when you die, but you're not there to enjoy it. It's really unfair. So that's one thing. Can you please have my funeral before I die? And number two, okay, remember I told this to a few people, they actually did it, that the last, as you committed the coffin, behind the screen, or actually sometimes in some crematoriums, they're really crazy. You press the button and the coffin goes down. And that's when a lot of people, they lose it and they start crying. Please, when I die, I want a special alterations to the cremation ceremony, that when you press a button to commit the coffin, it goes up. And everybody else as well. If your loved one is dying and then they do die, imagine if they go up into the air. That makes them feel uplifted. And when I first suggested that, they said, yes, I know, but there are some people in this world, they know they never go up after they die. So I thought, to make the funeral services really interesting, we have like 3 buttons, one to go up, one to go level, and one to go down. And we'll have everybody who comes to the funeral service, they can have a vote. That would make the funeral services far more interesting. Which way do they deserve to go? Okay, I better stop this. Anyway, next question. When doing anapanasati meditation, how does one who has not achieved jhana contemplate dhammanupassana? Basically, you can't. Anapanasati, maybe I should give a whole talk on this tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah, why not? So I'll give a talk of that. It's called breath meditation, but breath is just what you start with. Usually, there's 16 stages of anapanasati. The first 4 stages, you are observing the experience of breath as we all know it. The next 4 stages, you are experiencing how the mind experiences the breath. Not a physical feeling, but it's called a chitta sankhara. how the mind experiences. And that's where you start seeing the bliss in the breath. And then afterwards, the 9th, 10th, and 11th stages of anapanasati, that's where you're watching now the mind. You're not watching the breath anymore. And the simile I give to make it quite clear what you're up to, how do you get to Jhana growth? Many of you came in an aircraft, but you can't land the aircraft in the Dhamma hall. The aircraft takes you to the airport. From the airport you get into a car. The car can take you as far as the car park in the front here. Then you get out of the car, and then you have to put your shoes on and you walk. And when you get to the front of this building, you have to take your shoes off before you can come into this building. Different things have to be used on different parts of the journey. And the breath is just what you use at the beginning of breath meditation. You have to let the breath go. And that's what you do. As you go into the 9th, 10th, 11th stage of anapanasati, you go into the mind. And the 12th stage of anapanasati, you're going fully into the mind, into the jhanas. And there's no perception of the breath at all. You've used that, gone inside, and then you get your mind really powerful. Then you come out, and then you can do all the things like Dhammanupassana. Is that clear? Okay, not. So okay, I'll do that tomorrow. In more detail. What should we do when past memories come to mind when trying to meditate? They come into your mind. Do you invite them in? Or they just come in? They just come in, let them go out. That's why we have doors for. See that door in the back over there? It's not just to come in, is it? It's to come in and go out. So what you do is you let them come in. They're already in by the time you know them. And then let them go out. Simple as that. Usually the simile is like clouds in the sky. The clouds come in, the clouds go out. So let them come, let them go. And especially you start to focus deep inside where memories can't even touch you. Memories are just on the outside somewhere. And it's so much more pleasant to be in the present moment. And also memories. Sometimes are memories true? Or do we interpret memories? Most of the memories you have, you think happened. Did they? You were there at the time, but did they really happen? This is one of the amazing things. I remember I've only got one brother, and I know that one of us had German measles when we were young, the other one didn't. That's just the name of the disease. And we always used to argue, which one was it who had German measles? I was sure it was me. My brother said, no, it was him. So I remember one day we went to see our mum and said, which one was it? You know what my mother said? I know it was only one of you, but I don't remember which. So past memories, doesn't matter how important they were, how powerful they were, can't we just let them go? Just like the future, it's how we interpret them is the most powerful part of those memories, and you can let them go. You don't have to deal with them. You don't have to. Sometimes it's helpful, but not necessary. I remember having this argument with one of the psychologists here, and eventually he admitted that when he lost the argument, you can let any past memory, no matter how traumatic, you can let it go. Just to have that possibility means it can be done. You'll be free. And Gulimala, that's pretty traumatic. Kisa Gotami, who just lost a little child, she can let that go. Okay, that's the tomorrow. In spite of many years meditation, I can see fear inside me. Whenever I go inside deeper, I meet these fears in a diverse way. How can I melt this fear? This is a good sign, because when you have a fear, always realize that's when something you're attached to is about to disappear. You're being challenged. It's like a harder exam each time. Something you're very close to has been taken away from you. Please let it go. There's nothing worth keeping. What's that word? Sabbe Dhamma Sewanaya. I should never try and chant Pali or say Pali at 15 minutes to 9. You get a bit tired. No Dhamma is worth keeping.
Nothing is worth keeping, I think is the quote. I've got it.
Nothing?
I'll put it up on the board tomorrow.
Okay, very good. And I promise to have a look at it. Maybe. It's one of my favourite quotes. Nothing is just worth holding on to or keeping. And what that really means, is that as you go inside deeper, there's many times you come across these challenges. I remember this one monk, when he was about to get into these deep meditations for the first time. It's like you're standing here, and just beyond you is a deep, deep bliss. You can almost feel it, almost touch it, but you have to let go a little bit more just to get in there. I remember this monk saying that, I don't want to go in, it's too scary. But, it's really nice. No, I can't. Well, why not? No! But you do it anyway. You can't resist. The joys of these deep meditations are so great. And there's no danger at all. Especially if you get brainwashed by a monk like me who says, why not? Go for it. And there's no danger. Actually, there is a danger. I always have to be honest at this point. What's the danger of getting into a deep meditation? What is it? You lose your hair, yes. So some of the people I can see is going bald. I won't go further there. Do you think it is helpful to reflect on the 3 characteristics, anicca, dukkha, anatta, before we have experienced jhana? No. After, yes. You can kind of reflect on it, but you won't truly understand it. Okay. Am I going on too long? Are you happy? Are you asleep? No one's answering. Okay. So you are asleep. You're answering that question, or what question were you saying yes to? That's one of these similes. It takes a while. I usually talk about these similes deeper on in the retreat. That's a simile of the tadpole simile. The tadpole and the nature of water. How can a tadpole know what water is? Yeah, you can say anicca, dukkha, anatta. You may know their meaning and how they're used, but do you really understand it? Can a tadpole really understand what water is? No more than a fish can. Tadpole's lived all its life in water. Even if it studies water at tadpole school, it can still not really understand what water is. But the difference between a tadpole and a fish is that tadpole becomes a frog. They got all these little appendages. They get all these different abilities. That's what happens when you're meditating, like you were tadpoles when you first came in here, and you go out as frogs, I hope. So they have all these different abilities. So the ability the tadpole has is it can jump. It's a frog now. So a little frog, he doesn't really know what he's doing or she's doing. The first time jumps out of the pond. Just like that's usually how it feels the first time you get into a deep meditation. Sometimes you don't know what happened or why, but you're out. and you're into this world of the sixth sense. You're blissing out. But then the tadpole afterwards reflects something which was always there is now missing. For a frog, it's water. Water's gone. And for the first time, the frog can understand what water actually is. So when you get into one of these jhanas, then afterwards, when you come out, something has gone missing. And please, take notice of this statement. When you get into these deep meditations, don't try and, when you come out afterwards, analyze how did that feel, what was there. Please investigate what was missing, what had disappeared, what was always there which is no longer there. And one of the things you usually find, 5 senses, will, the doing, you go deeper and deeper, you find your sense of control going, one of the important parts of the sense of self. This is where you understand what anicca, dukkha, anatta is, with these experiences. But when you get into these experiences, don't try and find out, what actually was there. Find out what's missing, what vanished. Dear Ajahn, does Vaci Sankhara, Kaya Sankhara, Chitta Sankhara have different meanings when mentioned? Usually, whenever a question like that is answered, you don't just look at Vaci Sankhara, you look at what's its context, what's the words before and the words afterwards. Usually they're pretty the same, but you like to see the whole passage. Because this is, when you start translating things, you never translate word for word. If you translate word for word, you get these stupid translations. If you try and make the translation, it was raining like cats and dogs. How are you going to translate that into German or into French? It was raining like cats and dogs. Then you have idioms. You only translate whole sentences, phrases. These are the units of ideas, not words. Which is one of the reasons why you have to see the whole passage to make a proper translation, a proper rendering and understanding, not just words. Five minutes to go. Does walking meditation have to be slow? It's hard to get in your own zone pace with others next to you. Any advice, please? Well, just do walking meditation by yourself. Find a nice quiet place somewhere. It doesn't have to be slow, but it usually, for me, when I did the walking meditation as a young monk, there was just too much going on to go fast. But later on, you started seeing people doing walking meditation together, and it was a race to be the slowest. And sometimes you could see that, sort of in the walking meditation halls, people looking at each other. I'm usually slower than they are. This is not a contest. But also I have to say that there was this Sri Lankan family came to visit Jhana Grove once. They did ask permission. They said, can we just have a quick look at Jhana Grove Meditation Centre? And there was a Vipassana retreat on at the time. And about 10 minutes later, their kid came to see me. They were very agitated. They said, well, what's wrong? He said, Ajahn Brahm, you have to go to Jhana Grove now. I said, why? He said, Ajahn Brahm, your monastery has been invaded by zombies. Because apparently, that's what zombies look like in movies. They go really slow. And my sense of humour. To this day, when we do deliberate, slow walking meditation, I call that zombie meditation. Zombie walking meditation. As a kid, because especially it was a Sri Lankan retreat, and they were all dressed in white. So you've never seen that before. I thought it was really funny. Once I have settled into my meditation, I struggle to add kindness while also letting go of the doer. What is more important in each stage of the meditation? Adding more kindness or letting go? Kindness is letting go. Especially when you start to understand kindness as in that simile of opening the door of your heart, no matter what's happening. You're letting go of control. You're keeping the doors open. They can come in, go out. You don't hold anything. Kindness is a letting go, a letting be, letting things be natural. So kindness and letting go, to me, are one and the same. What did the water buffalo... You can read this out. No, actually, I'll do this at the very end. It's a joke. Why I often have fearful dreams. One of the ways of having why you have fearful dreams is when you go to sleep at night, you don't make a resolution. I may have a peaceful sleep. Make a resolution, a determination. Not just may I get up at a certain time, but may I sort of have a nice peaceful sleep. May I have a peaceful sleep. May I have a peaceful sleep. And that actually relaxes you. So you can go to sleep very peacefully. You don't have fearful dreams. If that doesn't work, if you wake up in the morning, you have fearful dreams, you'll hear more terrible stories like this. What did the water buffalo say when he dropped his kid off at school? What did the water buffalo say when he dropped his kid off at school? Bye, son. It's not just me who tells dad jokes, it's somebody else. That's a good one. Okay. Bye, meditators. I'm dropping you off and going to my room. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Hee. Thanks for putting up with me. This one over here, we keep this one. This is Anapanasati. I'll do that tomorrow.